Thank you very much. And as Heather mentioned, this is the tail end of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So I'm really happy to be joining our partners here at GMG to talk about cyber resilience. I think the last few years we've been harping a lot on cybersecurity, um, but actually maybe it's time to take a step back and think about why. As Heather mentioned, I will have time at the end for questions. If you're okay with your questions popping up in the recording for people, feel free to drop them in the chat so you don't forget. Otherwise, jot them down and we'll have time at the end. Either way works for me. As Heather said, I am the CEO and the CISO in residence for the Mining and Metals ISAC. Been working for 25 years in cybersecurity. The last 10 as a CISO in the mining industry, and am the founding chair of the Mining and Metals ISAC, and helped get the organization off the ground. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Mining and Metals ISAC is a not-for-profit industry association, similar in some ways to GMG, but very focused on operational cybersecurity. So like GMG, we bring together stakeholders in the mining industry to focus on cybersecurity. We share threat intelligence, what's happening to each other and similar industries. We've got working groups working on cybersecurity issues. We assist our members with incident response and resilience. We work on securing the mining supply chain. We do education awareness such as this and cyber research into all the new technology that we're looking to deploy in mining, from autonomy to various automation solutions and other things that are being deployed. So that's the Mining and Metals ISAC in a nutshell. So before we start talking about cyber resilience, a good place to start is where cybersecurity has traditionally been in mining overall. And it's really been focused on, protecting networks, devices, data from unauthorized access, from criminal use, really about ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that information of that system. And we've been working on that, for a few decades now. And we've been saying things for those decades, things like, if we've got good policies and processes, we can control people and reduce the security risk. We can maybe deploy good technology to prevent and detect cyber attacks. If we can respond quickly enough to a cyber attack, we can prevent damage to our operations. And we talk about needing to do that because, we think, cybersecurity people need to be perfect all the time, with the bad guys only need to be right once. And then, if we can train our users appropriately, we can stop them from clicking on the bad things that get our environments infected. And, how's that worked out for us? Right, over the last year, we've had a number of cybersecurity incidents in mining. Starting at the tail end of last year into January in British Columbia, Copper Mountain suffered about a 3-week production outage. In August, Freeport McMoran announced an incident that was the same people that took out MGM casinos a little bit later in the year. Thanks to supply chain issues and third-party applications that were insecure, March saw Rio. And then in June, Shell, Siemens, Schneider, Honeywell, Ernst & Young. July saw Barrick and Fortescue. And then some other times, in May, for other reasons, we had ABB. June, we had Suncor. And we still haven't quite figured out when Microsoft had their problem. And so we're seeing, despite all of that work coming from and all that investment that's been made into these security controls, incidents still happen. And so we're starting to see globally, not just in mining this year, the investments starting to stop. You look in manufacturing where mining fits in, Security teams have been asking for 26% budget increases, which has been about normal for year-over-year increases. They've gotten about 9%. And that's been across the entire, a number of other industries, not just manufacturing or mining hits in. And that actually, when I talk to mining security teams and CIOs and leadership, that's about what we're seeing across the industry. So why is the money not getting out? Ultimately, cybersecurity, as we've been doing it, and as a guy who's been doing cybersecurity for 25 years, it almost pains me to say, cybersecurity is looking like a really lousy investment. The budget increase requests have been limitless, but the increased spend, as we've talked about, hasn't reduced the risk of attack. It's happening anyways. And at the same time, those cybersecurity controls that security teams are putting in are getting in the way. Organizations have a limited, and people have a limited cognitive capacity to absorb change. So all the digital transformation, other initiatives with the cybersecurity on top are just getting to be too much. We're finding business executives and folks at sites are having trouble dedicating the attention to that and still meet their business objectives. Because despite all of that asks, we're still getting the material breaches happening. Why has that been happening? The challenge has been cybersecurity folks really as an IT function have been really separated from the business and separated from the site. The objectives don't align with others. If you were to check with your own corporate cybersecurity people and ask them where their objective is for tonnage or production or ounces or whatever you measure your performance in, it's not there, right? Their language, their objectives are around reducing breaches, stopping bad guys, making controls more restrictive and effective, with no mention of the impact they might have on the business. And so the security teams and the security departments are seen as technology, not business. It's not in the same language. They don't seem to have valuable input and are often seen as obstacles to getting stuff done, which ultimately at site is what's critically most important. So with that where we are right now, what's the solution? The solution really is to stop thinking about cybersecurity by itself and move to cyber resilience. And cyber resilience really is to say, despite what may happen out there, despite what an attacker might do, despite what IT problem we could run into, we have to be able to meet our business objectives. We have to be able to meet the needs of safe production at site. We have to be able to meet the needs of producing our engineering deliverables for an engineering firm. We have to meet the needs of delivering our product to our customers in the supply chain, regardless of what happens. And that significantly changes the conversation. Because in my view, cyber resiliency, really does encompass much more of the business. It's really got three equal thirds. There's the work we traditionally do around cybersecurity. And that is, the work of the CIO, CISO, CTO, that technical work that happens. But then we've also got the operational resilience component, which is really in the domain of the COO, the CFO, business unit VPs and general managers, to say, at my operation, in my part of the business, how will I be resilient? And then we've got the communications area, which encompasses legal, corporate communication, investor relations, human resources, into how do we communicate what we're doing and how do we communicate about what's going on. And I'll take a bit of time talking about all three of those thirds and how they give us a different result. The first is if we think about resiliency over cybersecurity, we actually change the way we look at things versus how a traditional cybersecurity approach of just implementing control after control after control. And when I did this talk last time in Perth, I had about 4 slides on this, and then I found actually in a book by a lady named Kelly Shortridge, Security Chaos Engineering. She had a great list that was better than my many slides, so I've taken her list. And a good resilient security strategy takes into account the natural human nature and how the people behave. And it's a very people-centric cybersecurity program. So on the cybersecurity, we promote and design security based on how humans actually behave. We treat human attention as a finite and precious resource that we can't waste. Where possible, we design hazards out of a system at the engineering stage or reduce them. We avoid relying on human attention wherever we can. We don't rely, and so that's things like we don't think that if you're busy, you're doing a lot of things, we can't expect you to maybe take the time to analyze an email fully, for example. We don't rely on humans that contrary to their nature 100% of the time. People need to get their job done. And if we assume that they'll put security ahead of doing that job, that won't happen. And finally, we have to respect users' time, attention, cognitive energy, and priorities all the time. And if you think about your security program right now, it probably doesn't do it. Thinking about security programs as a lot of them sit right now, we say, if we can just train everybody so nobody clicks on a bad link, 100% of the time will be safe. And if somebody does and everything falls apart, it's their fault. We don't do that in any other area. Can you imagine if my operations safety plan was, we'll all be perfectly safe as long as everybody does everything 100% correctly all the time? The result of that would be a shutdown operation for good reason. Because people can't and they don't, and their focus isn't always on that item. As in Tim's safety share at the beginning, right? Sometimes people are focused on getting the most rock as possible onto the truck without thinking about other things as they go through. That's just human nature, and we have to respect where that is. That does mean, though, in trying to respect people's time, business priorities, and working through, that potentially mistakes are going to happen. And that's where resilience comes in at the operation. Resilience really means ensuring that despite something happening, we will still be able to carry on operations. And we had some great examples, of that. This year, we had Freeport McMoran around August get breached. They were able to maintain production at all their sites. In spite of that instance, they still made copper. The same people really famous in the news got MGM Grand a few months later. The casino was shut down for 2 weeks, largely. People couldn't get into their rooms. People couldn't work the slot machines. It was chaos. And that just comes down to ensuring resiliency. The other benefit of resiliency is at the operational level, you can come up with a plan to make product, to continue operations, regardless of why an IT outage may happen. If you're at site, does your autonomous haul truck system care if it's unavailable because of a cyber attack, or because a backhoe took out a fiber line. And when I look at a lot of our members' mine sites, the most frequent source of outage isn't cyber attack, it's backhoes taking out equipment, taking out fiber lines, or somebody not putting down a dump truck um, going underneath an overhead line and taking it out, right? It's failures and mistakes that cause a lot of the outages, but it doesn't matter. If you're resilient, you get to protect yourself against all of those. And what's resiliency look like? Number one is identify the can't fail systems. Add redundancy to those. So you have two of those critical systems or more, but then ensure you've got a plan for if it does fail, what are you going to do? You want to ensure your critical systems are separated so that one problem or incident, one system failure won't take them all out. You're going to think about your external systems and have plans should they not be available. A good example is one of our members that is a gold miner. They had great resiliency for their on-site systems, but then they realized they needed the corporate cloud-based ERP to order the reagents they need for gold processing. And if that became unavailable, it didn't matter that their site systems worked because they couldn't buy those chemicals they needed. Other sites realize that they have no plan to get diesel fuel without the accessibility of their ERP system. So coming up and identifying those external systems and have plans available should they go down. IT systems and your technology requires preventative maintenance and hygiene as well. Just like your haul truck needs its tires replaced, brakes done, just like your crusher needs to get relined, your cyber systems, your IT systems, your OT systems now need regular updates, maintenance, and patching. However, most site maintenance plans don't include those systems. They don't include that maintenance, and that has to be there. Identify, simplify, protect those external connections. And then the most important thing at site is to test those plans and assumptions. And that testing could be as simple as a tabletop exercise where you work through it on paper to see if it works, but even more valuably, a practical try it and see what happens. I'm going to give you a couple examples of some plans and why that testing is important. I was working with one operator who had a plan for their autonomous haulage system for resiliency. And they said, if that comes unavailable, well, we used to run with drivers, so we'll just get the drivers back and put them back in the trucks. Well, the lead on question then is, well, where do you find the drivers? Because you laid them all off when you finished your switch to autonomous haul trucks, or you reassigned them to other roles in the company and now they're no longer current. Can those drivers 1 year, 2 years later safely get back into the cab of those haul trucks and drive them when you've had them reassigned to other tasks for the last year or last 2 years? And the quick answer we got to is no. And so maybe we need to invest in some technology there. But then again, taking that operational resilience point of view at the whole operation, we're able to say, wait a second, we know we can rebuild that autonomous haulage system in 2 weeks. We've got the real estate on site. If we can maintain an ore stockpile of 2 weeks production, well then, while the haulage system is down, the plant can keep running, we can keep producing, we can get that system back up and keep things running. So you can come up with a resilience plan then that is practical and works. And it might not be a lot of technology. It might just be looking at the operation as a whole and coming up with how can we survive that outage. And now it doesn't matter if there's a cyber attack or a backhoe. You have an operation that can survive that outage. Similarly, on the plant side, They had an expert system driving a lot of their decision making around plant operations. And we said, okay, what if that's unavailable? And their answer is, well, we'll just run it manually. So I said, let's try it. Tomorrow we'll turn it off for an hour. And before we did that test, we had to stop because we realized nobody on site had run that plant manually in about 8 years. And the last person who's done it retired 5 years ago. And so they didn't have that documented in those processes, and that training wasn't done. It'd be the equivalent to saying, my fire escape plan is let's evacuate the building, but you don't have a plan for how, you've never rehearsed it. You're just going to assume everybody will disappear on their own if there's a fire. And that's not terribly practical. The final piece of resilience that people often forget is communication. And communication is super important to cyber resilience now, particularly for companies that are listed in US stock exchanges that have brand new reporting requirements. You need to do disclosure now for cyber incidents. Well, that disclosure better match your press releases, and that better match what you tell your internal employees because that'll leak. And it better match what people actually see on the ground because that'll show up on Twitter, or I guess X now it's called. And have that detail right. You have to figure out, what does a material incident look like to me? What is our holding statement that's going to go? How do you update it? And that's important for a couple of reasons. On a lot of the incidents I had back on an earlier slide, the attacker actually announced that incident publicly before the company did. The way the world found out about that cyber incident is on one of those attackers' name and shame sites, they announced the breach. Well, now you're on the back foot of that communication. And what's that do? That consumes limited cognitive energy, limited cognitive time, limited working time and energy for the people that should be focused on keeping the business running, that they're now running out, putting out fires with the media and shareholders and regulators and everybody else asking them about what they saw in the news. When really we need those people focused on maintaining safe production and resolving the incident. The other problem is, of course, if you let the attackers do the communication, they're going to time that announcement for the worst possible time for you. Whereas you can communicate it at a better time and you can control that. Then finally, you can pre-plan how you're going to share with law enforcement, with the ISAC, with others when those incidents happen. And then finally, of course, you want to test those plans as well and make sure that works. But communication failures can add all kinds of problems and challenges now that have to work through with that triad. So summing it up, before we finish off, as we go through here, cyber resilience really is about bringing cybersecurity in line with your business strategy and have objectives that match the objectives of the company. You know, so cybersecurity objectives for a mining company look like they're from a miner, or from an engineering firm look like they're from an engineering firm. It brings focus to what's important. The real objective isn't to try to prevent us from getting attacked or breached by the bad guys. The focus actually is on how do we ensure production is maintained, that we can keep safe production, we can maintain critical business functions despite those kinds of incidents happening. Because the reality is they are going to happen. Everybody will get their turn. And finally, resilience also brings the entire company together. Instead of cybersecurity being something that the IT department or the security team does to you, resilience becomes a thing that we plan in, and we engineer in to our processes, to our solutions, to our technology. It requires that we all then work together to get that done, and we all work towards the ultimate objective which is safe production. And finally, I guess I'll add is, we've been losing a lot in the last couple of years on the cybersecurity front. We've had a lot of incidents happening both in our sector and globally, and resilience, those incidents will continue. It's too hard and too expensive now to try to stop everything. Resilience is how we maintain operations, becomes the tree falling in the forest with nobody around, right? It's how we get to winning in protecting our operations, protecting our people, and ensuring safe production as we go. So that's what I've got for you today.